Basically, when I left school, I was not sure what I wanted to do. So I went where my friends went, went to the prison service. So I was a warden at the beginning. An extremely boring job that was for me, because uh, after my training of 6 months, it was actually very hard those days in the prison service. It was not easy. That probably built me, for the future to do the task force selection. But they sent me to the Centrale Voorraden Depot. I had to look after a building with the weaponry and other stuff in 6 months. It was frustrating. I wanted to resign, so I told them I'm going to leave unless they sent me to the dog unit in Nigel. So I went to the dog unit in Nigel because I love animals. I love dogs. I've trained my own dogs since I was in school, out of ordinary books. And then I spent a couple of years there with all the dogs. Did training. One of my dogs, small Alsatian, his name was Rommel. He was a show dog. So on weekends we did show. His speciality was he jumped through the fire hoops, and he could jump very high as well. But that also became boring to me, and I wanted in on some action. So I told them, I'm finished now. Yeah, sent me to Modderbee prison, which is one of the more or less most dangerous prisons in South Africa. And then me and Rommel went into the prisons. A dog handler was not allowed to carry any other weapon except his dog. So ordinary wardens could carry batons. Dog handler had only his hands, and his dog, which are deemed unfair. But anyway, so me and Rommel went into the prison, and although he was an excellent dog for outside in the mealie fields and in the farmlands, he couldn't handle that pressure in the inside the prison. And me and Rommel left the prison with our tails between our legs. So I called the unit in Nigel, and I told him, listen, this is what happened. Please, I'm gonna bring Rommel back to you. Give me the most aggressive dog you have there. And they sent Rommel to work on the farms, which he was very capable to do. The pressure of the loopgange inside of the prison was too much, so they gave me Hermans. So me and Hermans was the most aggressive dog. We bonded very quickly, but he was as stubborn as a mule, that dog. So it took me long to train him, and I would always have some sort of a hurdle. Then his feet, he wasn't used to the tar road, so then his feet will bleed. And then I will bind up his feet. I'll put his cage onto the grass. I will buy milk out of my own salary. I would give him milk to strengthen his immune system. And then I would build him up slowly. In that meantime, I would work inside with some of the loopgang dogs, the dogs that I put on the side of the prison. Those were the most aggressive dogs that would bite their owner, would bite the grandmother. Then we would take them in, we would make them more aggressive, and that's where they would be in case of an escapee, and the prisoners try to escape. The dog will obviously try and prevent it. And then when it came to Hermans' pass-out period, or to the tackles, not this pass-out period, but to the tackles. Then we had one issue. So what will happen? You usually have your right arm would be covered for the dog to attack. So the rest of your body would just be covered by a thick leather outfit. So in case the dog misses his target, you're still protected. So then Hermans would go, he would run, I would tell him to attack. He would see, no, this is not this right on me, it's too big. And he'll grab him. he'll grab him by the leg. And then obviously the pain, the teeth won't really go through, but the pressure of the bite, and then obviously I had to take him off as soon as possible. Okay, we fixed that problem. We take prison blankets, put it on the right leg, and then make him run again, because we used to run tackles for each other, because the dog didn't know color or creed. He bit what he was told to bite. So then Hermans will run. He says, "No, this leg looks too thick." And he grabs him on the left leg. So we had to completely cover. We had to completely cover the person that did tackles. And that is what also transpired when I started working with him in the prison. He was a terror in terms of, when you get attacked and there's prison riots, it's not a game. It is serious stuff. So they come with a sharpened object, and if those gang members can stab a officer, he moves up in rank. Even more so, if he can successfully stab a dog or a dog handler, he moves up in rank. So it was serious stuff there, which was good for Hermans, because once he's bitten, when we are attacked and he bites, he goes for the leg. So I left it that way. I didn't make him go for the arm, because they would put blankets on their arm. If the dog bites, they will kill the dog. So when my dog bit by the leg, I would pull him. I will pull him. The attacker will fall, and I will obviously just control the knife until I can get the knife out of his hand. And when I have him under control, I'll obviously take my dog. I will command him to let go. So that is what some of the exciting stuff we've done in a prison service. After about 4 years, I got bored in a prison service, because I got transferred to Robben Island, and it wasn't the same anymore. So I got the interdepartmental transfer to the South African Police Force that time. They changed to the service after 94. And then I did a shortened course in Pretoria at the police college, because of my previous experience. And then I went to Cape Town Central, where I was an ordinary street cop. Those days, sometimes we were so short-staffed, even in those days, that I was on a Friday night and I would be the only police officer, cop, driving a complaint van. I have no second with me. I have to note the complaints and do as much as I can. It was actually exciting stuff, but wasn't preferable for the clients, which were the ordinary public at that stage. This also became boring to me, and I didn't know, am I going to keep on doing this job, because it wasn't really for me. And there's certain reasons I will not discuss on this profile. Maybe another day. We will not have time to discuss it. So then I heard this one guy, I think his name was Herman, in the street when I was on my way. I did shopping or something. I was on my way back to the barracks, Cape Town Central, and I heard him speaking about he's going on a special task force selection course. Immediately that drew my attention, because when I was a little boy, I always used to play soldiers with the toy soldiers and everything. And I always used to go into the mountains with my dog and go walk and do adventurous stuff. And so I asked him about what is a special task force selection. Like a lot of our listeners now, they will not know what is the special task force. So I inquired, and I explained to me more or less what it was, and I asked him how he got in and so forth. And this guy was as fit as a windhound, so he was destined to make the special task force selection. Right, and now I thought, how am I going to get in here? The one girl that works with me at the cop shop, can't remember her name, short little girl, she said a friend of hers is married to a special task force operator. She contacted her, he contacted me, or I contacted him, and he put me on the selection, which was approximately 3 weeks away. Now, for a physical endurance selection course like that, you have to train months and months in advance. So I would always have trained a bit, and then I would slack down for a couple of weeks, and then I'll train. So I wasn't in perfect condition. So I basically gave it my best, and I knew I had to get my muscles prepared for the physical endurance, which I did. So off I went to Pretoria. I did a selection course. I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, a selection course is a thing of its own. The stories from there onwards is written in the book. So the audience of people that's interested, they can purchase the book and then they can read it after that. I made selection course. It was tough on my third day into Fastpaid. I had difficulties kind of walking, but I just went through it and the pain and everything disappeared. But obviously, my mental strength was more than Herman's because I saw him the first day and the second day I didn't see him again. You know, the guy that everybody thought that will make it did not make it. So after the selection, when I returned to the Cape Town Central, because that was where I was stationed, so now I made a selection successfully. So now they have to transfer me. So the commander in Cape Town, the station commander, has now to release me. He has to write the release note. So now I was still deployed there. I still had to work. So I put my camo uniform on with my flashes, and they didn't like that, you know. So now I have to work in my blue uniform. I said, well, okay, at least I can put my wings on, you know. And then the station commander, when I had to fly, he said, no, you're going nowhere. You're going to stay here. I'm short on staff. I said, I don't think Major Fryer is kind of like that, Colonel. I turned around and marched out of there, and I called Major Fryer. Yeah, he said, no, just hold on. Major Fryer obviously called General Blackjack. General Blackjack rang down on this colonel, you know, and he immediately signed my paper and wanted me out of there. So then I went up to Pretoria. We lived in the barracks. We were almost never there. Sometimes we were out on operations. I calculated 1 year, 11 months out of 12, I were not in my barracks room. I was on operations, doing training, doing extra courses to earn my operator's badge. I must say that for a reason, because you have to earn it like a professional qualification. You have to earn it. You can't just wear it when you've been on a unit for 2 or 3 years. There is certain criteria that's set in almost in stone from the beginning, where people like Maritz van Zyl, Karel van der Walt, and other guys sat down, and they did this in an official meeting where everybody, the whole unit, had an input. Those rules are set down in my book. Readers are welcome to read about it. The training was really tough. I mean, what I can remember one morning very clearly, our two instructors were young guys. You know, they went through a tough instructors course, almost like a mini selection. I never did it, so I can't elaborate on it. Would actually be interesting to have one of my instructors in Kroonstad come on your show and, you know, explain about the selection, the small instructors courses, they selection, whatever it was, they had to do to become an instructor for the Lukkawana, for the prison service guys. And a Lukkawana is obviously a term commonly known because of the green uniform that we wore, you know, and Lukkawana is green. So, and that is why one of my urban instructors, he called me Lukkawan, and I've got many nicknames. And then I call him White Rat, you know. Because, so that's just the way it is. So one morning we went for breakfast, and we got up like something 4 every morning, and your bed had to be precisely, you know. If the instructor wanted to find dust, he will find it. We sometimes, for BO inspection, we will clean right through the night. One morning when we went to breakfast, the instructors were in some sort of a mood, I would call it, and they marched us to for breakfast, something like 4:45, if I can remember correctly, in the morning. One of the guys passed out. He passed out. And the one guy, we were all 18 years old, One guy was so sweaty, it looked like he climbed out of a swimming pool. And we're all 18 years old. So that is how tough it sometimes was, the training. And you just had to do it. That was your job, that's what you chose to do. And, in the prison service, you either choose to go to a small station that you work on the farmlands, like Rommel chose. He's very happy. He's obviously passed away now, the dog. I love all the dogs that I ever owned. Or you chose to go to a prison that sometimes you have serious rights, like Modderbeer, or some of the other tough prisons. To be to stand in those areas where they feed the prisoners when there's real riots, it is not easy. Usually most of the Likawana, they will scale the fence or they'll run away. It's not all of the guys that stand and fight. Our unit did, however, return and did a hostage release in Boksburg prison. I can't recall the year. It will be in the book. I was not part of that, and we were not allowed any weaponry. So it's the first time in a task force career that they had to do without weapons and use their hand-to-hand combat skills. Well, I can almost say to some disadvantage to the prisoners that were there and gave their resistance, and attacked them. So, when we were in the task force, myself as one of the martial arts specialists when I was there, myself, Hannes Els, Frikkie Strydom, for instance, we used to do Kuk Sool One Korean martial arts, which is not presented in South Africa anymore. We used to do it together, and sometimes you try and control your punches, but sometimes it goes a little bit further than that. And then I will bring this up. It's quite interesting, We had a Friends Day, and to show you that we have no hard feelings towards each other, we had a Friends Day at our office in Pretoria one day, and then I was very active with doing martial arts, and my senses were obviously heightened sharp, and I was always very quick. So somebody would battle to land a punch on me. And I had one guy studied for attorney, other guy is a professional hunter, and then you can bring your friends over, they come to the task force, and then we all have a couple of drinks and snacks and whatever you want to, and we can mingle with each other. And now I was talking to my friends, having a good time, and there comes Milies from the Aarde, And now even if I tell the story, he will have no hard feelings. Now Milies had a few drinks in. He comes in, now he's busy biting me. So, I'm now the Nyotter, which means the younger guy, and he's the older guy. So I have to have respect for him, almost like in a gang, Now I ask Milies, now he's giving my friends, giving them trauma. I say, Milies, please, calm down, don't be like that, Okay, I managed to get him out of there and to go back to his own friends, or I can't remember where he went. Now we carry on, we talk, and we're having a good time. Yeah, Milies is back, All of a sudden, he's grabbing like this. His thumb goes here into my jugular throat, but he's busy choking me. I don't know what went into me. I said, no, I'm not going to stand for this. I do Kupsul move, number whatever. Louis that stand next to me, he also did a bit of it. He identified the move. It just came naturally. But I threw him that he bounced on his back. He landed in front of the feet of Major Fryer, our commander. That did not look good. You know, and now I was in war mode, you know, now the martial arts training took over. I thought, now I'm going to finish him, you know. Yeah, from the left, I think Ashley Crooks came, and from the right, obviously that would be Watson. He was always with Mike Fryer. And I thought, okay, there's now more targets, and I moved back because now I can see what I'm going to finish. They just came in to calm the situation. Okay, then I realized, and I said, okay, you know, I had to obviously explain what happened. Because I was the nyotter, they chased me away. I had to go drink at Alu Park, you know, with my friends further. The more senior guy, although he was the wrong, he could stay, you know, what can I say? So, but still, there's no hard feelings, you know. It happened, and it's done. Made a mistake. We shook hands afterwards, and that's it. Paul's usually the guy that had the most martial arts training, I want to say, as such. Joe Grant Grierson, I think he's passed away. God rest his soul. He was the first guy. He was 8th Dan. I can't remember the style, his specific style. He was the first hand-to-hand combat instructor the task force had. Then it obviously got passed on to the next guy, that had the most martial arts training, I want to say, as such. So Buxton was one guy. His name, he basically was also a good martial arts guy. Myself, Frikkie Strydom, Hannes Els, names I can mention. And then a prominent figure in the Special Task Force martial professional career, I want to call it as such, is a guy that brought in a system called contact training to improve, not to impress. That's what I can remember. The guy's name is now in Australia. He already wrote one book, probably more. His name will come up just now. It was already collected. So the relevant detective or whichever branch, intelligence branch, whoever used us, the information was already at hand. So let's say it's a hostage situation. So the police would have already cordoned off the bank. Let's say it's a bank, and they would have called our operations center. The commander will activate the duty section that's always ready. And then we will send our advanced team, and then the necessary teams, all depending on the scale of the hostage situation. Usually the negotiation team, the negotiations, somebody that you might always also want to interview, the negotiators would already be busy negotiation. If they have not been, the senior task force officer is also trained to negotiate. He will start with the negotiation until the negotiations come there, because our first priority is to save life. We will not take somebody's life unless it's absolutely necessary. It comes from command from the negotiation will give the release. He would say, okay, negotiations failed completely. Then the commander in charge there, the senior task force officer, would then give the yes or no. And not some officers are unfortunately make better decisions. People make mistakes, and some make better decisions. I write about it in my book. I'm open and honest, and then when he gives the count, the sniper will take the first shot. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 snipers. It will sound like one shot because it will all fire from different angles at the same time. Your penetration team would already be ready very close to the building door, whatever it is. They would have creeped up without the hostage taker knowing about him. En op die toespringteken, we call it, so when the snipers fire shots, they will act immediately. Usually when they go in, the hostage taker is already dead, you know. And it had to be done. It's in order to save the life of little Emma, 4 years old, or somebody else. And what's the difference between a special forces unit and a specialist units, if you want to call it as such? I can't now recall everything. So in detail, I set it out. You know, it might be tweaked a little bit, but I set it out there. Anybody can challenge me on it. I think I got it down pretty accurately. So a special forces unit, let me just say it quickly. They have to be air, sea, and land. So they have to have a capability to parachute with kit to land behind enemy lines or wherever, to land somewhere, follow up on a tracking, track a suspect or a farm murderer or whatever. You have to be scuba dive qualified, attack diver, a rescue diver, whatever it has to be, and you have to be seaborne qualified. Air, land, and sea. You have your specialists, like many snipers. You have to have people that specialize in sniping. It is too many to know. You also want an operator that is hungry to learn. That is what makes some of the best operators. You don't want a couch potato talkie. Okay, I'm use it talkie now because what the book about. You want a guy that's hungry. So he wants to specialize ideally in 2 or 3 things. He just places, and probably a guy that's not married, because at the beginning, because you want to expose him to all the jobs, all the training, all the courses, you want to build him. You want to form him like putty almost, so that he can become, from the nyotter, which you are when you started a unit, you want him to be a fully fledged operator. That takes approximately 3 years in total. You first get your wings, yeah, when you've done your selection and you've obviously completed it. Let me just say, in the previous years, when I've used my words correctly, once you've fell off, like I write in the book, any part of the selection. So if you've gone through everything and you're on skydive and you can't skydive, you get thrown off selection. If you want to come back, you come back next year and you start from the beginning. I think now I don't want to speak about the task force now. I can speak very little about them because I left end of 2002. I write more or less up to 2004, and I can state it for the record because I'm now not qualified to write further. I'm not in a unit anymore. The unit had to change, like it has to do always, and they change for certain reasons, to the better, to whatever. It is not for me to elaborate on it. Not a guy that's somebody that were on a unit like I see on TikTok and so on, on a unit for 18 years or 14 years and just left. Now they can write another book, which would be very good, you know, and I'll support that idea as well. And I think now if you go through certain phases and you pass it and you fall off, then you can come back next year and you can climb on the selection, which I don't agree with. but it's just my opinion. Certain guys like Willie Kleingeld, he's as tough as nails. He did 2 full selections. And there's more than one of them. I did my one, and it was tough enough, and I've got many stories to tell about that. Let me explain the operator's badge quickly. A lot of these things I discovered when I had to do my research, proper research, to be able to complete a book about the special task force. Your professional qualifications are worn on your right chest, not your left chest. Your operator's badge is a professional qualification. You had to go through a rigorous task force selection course and complete it successfully. You had to obviously be airborne qualified. You have to be dive qualified. You have to be explosive qualified. Then you had to do some extra courses like VIP protection, which everybody has to do. And then you had to do another course where you specialized in at least. That's the bare minimum, like sniping, rock climbing, rescue, rope work, which I was the lead instructor after Colonel Saki van Rensburg left. Medic, there are many facets to specialize in. So you have to have specialized in something. You can't be in the office for a week or 2 weeks. Right. Again, I'll speak up to 2004. If they change the rules after that, I will not elaborate on that. I cannot elaborate on it. So your bird, the falcon needs to fly towards your heart. So it's it's a professional, like a degree you study. This is, I write about it in my book. The people that's interested can obviously read the more fine detail. So it's worn on your right chest. The bird flies to the heart. Okay, the peregrine falcon in our case. And just for interesting sake, I've redesigned these 2 badges to be of high quality according to the heraldry. The falcon, for instance, will even have a red eye if you look very closely to it. What happened later on is the police got a name badge that came on your right chest. So it would say Willard and have this big badge on your right chest. So there was no place for our bird anymore. So they moved the bird to the left chest. Interesting, very interesting. I took out of some of my lockers, some of my tactical clothes, which I hanged in my cupboard, and then I discovered, what I discovered, which proves that this operator's badge is the original old school correct badge. I discovered my camo shirt that I wore in the task force, and they moved the operator's badge to the left chest above the wings, which obviously there was no other space when they put this badge on. And where does the bird fly to? It still flies to this side. But I don't know then what happened. The heraldry for the operator's badge only came out in 2016, I think. I put it in a book, although it's after 2004, because I had to. I'm a factual man, so I work on facts in everything I do. I have to have the facts of the matter. So this now is my camo uniform that they made for me, and I took it out of a locker. So if you look at this now, you see here's the new badge that I created with my name. I can always have it. I will not wear it unless I go hunting. Then I can obviously wear it. And there you see is the wings. They moved the operator's badge here. Where's the bird flying to? He's flying there. He's flying away. He wants to be on the right chest. So obviously they had to then change the heraldry probably so the bird could look towards the heart, because he has to fly towards the heart. So that is the and I have to say for all of the naysayers, because the only negative feedback I got of my book was some of my own kind. And I have to I just prove them wrong, you know. So there's the facts now. For all the young operators now, they know the history. So this is what you call the legacy. And I'm glad that you have a podcast like this, and I'm very glad because I was now the only guy that spoke out about the special task force because I wrote a book and people invited me for podcasts. But now somebody like Maritz is also speaking out. You have two walks. One is in the mountain area close to Waterval, which is 2.5 hours north of Gauteng, close to Thabazimbi. Then you have a walk. You have to walk through the night. It's about 100 kilometers, probably 101. They call it the 101. Then you have to walk continuously right through the night with basically skin gear, not a lot of gear on you. Then when you pass out your last walk, I believe I might not be correct. If you did a 101, they might have reduced the Kalahari walk, which is at the end from 150 to 100. If you have not done it, you've done your 150 kilometers in the Kalahari. I think we only did 100 kilometers. So they sometimes change the selections around a little bit. And like I said, they sometimes do it, they adapt because you have to better, the unit have to better. You have to adapt according to the circumstances. So we did the Kalahari stop, or 101, which were at there in the mountains, on the dirt roads close to Thabazimbi. And then we did our 100-kilometer walk in a Kalahari in the desert, in the sand and stuff. And then, you right at the end, that is your final walk. And then you get some of the guys who want to give up, but then that's where the group pulls them through and you carry that individual. Throughout, they're very professional. Sometimes the instructor, you won't know why he's mad, He might have gotten a message from somebody, that we've been trying to soft or this, and then you will get the opfok, and then for nothing, you don't know what you've done wrong. For instance, I'm not going to try to mention the name. When I was on selection, then right at the end, one of the senior instructors there that were on the e-selection course, one of the urban instructors, he started picking on me, and we were already quite advanced in our selection course. And I don't know why. I just said, yes, Sergeant, no, Sergeant. Yes, Sergeant, no, Sergeant. Constantly. And when I finished my Kalahari stop, and I said, it's all over. You earned your wings. That was after the parachuting phase. I went to the instructor. I said, Sergeant, will not mention his name. I don't think you'll mind, but I said, Sergeant, why did you pick so much on me? I said, must we go out and sort it out in the bushes or what? We were quite wild there, because I thought he had something personal. Let's go sort it out and then it's over. He said, no. He just thought I could have done better. That's what he said. And I really didn't understand it until this day. And, it was over. So we sorted it out right there and then. And then we had some good operations together. There's two things I want to say about it. The guys that fell off, they just closer to their calling. We each have a calling in life. Okay, and it changes over the years. You must just be true to the course, if I want to put it as such. They just closer to their calling and they find what they're better in. We all have our skills, our skill set, and the task force selection and other selections are not for everybody. The second thing I want to say, we finished selection third in 21. We were the largest selection. I don't know yet, maybe there were other selections that were more, but up to then, And we were 26 guys. We were extremely strong selection. Blommy, that passed away, God rest his soul, he said out of his mouth, and nobody can say anything about it because he was extremely senior instructor. He said selection 13 were one of the toughest selections they ever had. Up to then, obviously. And nobody will call me, some people probably to, congratulate me, but what he said, and he won every selection, the course leader. And that's what he said. So we were 26 guys. So one of the guys that fell off was the guy that I boxed with, at the beginning. Unfortunately, one of the guys are my good friends. And I can't really remember the other three. They didn't fall off. They didn't give up. They were tough. So we were set down one evening. We didn't know what was going on. So the instructor sat in front of us. One of them was John van der Linde. And then you had to sit on a chair. And I said there was two chairs. I didn't know why. I sat on the one and I was told, no, I have to sit on this one. And I went, okay, yes, sir. Or what his rank was, the warrant officer. And now they question you, like ask you certain questions. And then you obviously answer them the best you can. And I was one of the guys that were warned, because like they were not sure they're going to keep me or let me go. And there was a few of us. So let's say more or less 6 of us were warned. I think Hannes else were one. I can't remember all the guys. 21, 26, 5 of us of the group, because they tried to break us on weekends again and again, and we kept on grinding, and we will pull up the guys and as a group we went through. We were just extremely strong group. So they probably got word from the commander, wherever the group is too big. It was they never had something like this before. So they let 5 guys go. And they shouldn't have done that. Those instructors made the wrong call. They shouldn't have let those guys go. Only if you fall out of your own accord, or you fall off with psychologically or whatever, you should not let the guy go. Let him get to the office. At the office, you'll see if he shapes up or not. They made a mistake there. And I've probably told it to them before, some of them, and I will tell that here on international podcast. Those guys fall off, about 50% fall off on pre-selection that have started in certain years. We had none. You just rocked up and then they felt like flies in the first day. And then when you get to selection course of that, between 3 and 6%, more or less, it differs from year to year. So if I must say true, 1 or 2% finally makes it. Let's make it up to 3%. I must say that was something difficult for me to determine when I wrote the book. You'll see I had to use the year 2005 to get the accurate figure, because what also was extremely challenging for me was to get information, because a lot of operations were not recorded. The most accurate facts I got out of the operators that I interviewed. And there's a reason why I could put so much detail in certain of the operations, because I was busy writing a biography, sort of my own life. So some of the jobs I wrote down in detail shortly after the operations, like Banangu or Banangu I haven't written about yet. I'm still collecting facts. Anyway, some of the operations I had in very detail. So then when I was approached by certain a very good instructor, stedelijk instructeur, when I was approached by him and I asked me to write a book, I said, no, you must write a book. You created the website. You've got the most information because we've got this private website for the task force. And he kept on with me, I must write a book. I said, listen, I'm busy with another book. You write the book. So, after 3 or 4 or 5 double red hearts and Coke that we drank, he kept on nagging on me. Name is Karel van der Walt. I said, okay, I will stop my book, but this is a prerequisite. This is what I want. And then I'll write it. So he gave me all that he had. And then I started writing the book, and about 7 years later, I completed. Certain years I couldn't write it. It would probably have taken me 4 years, 3-4 years, but certain years I was just busy with other operations or personal struggles, So sometimes you just have to play a little bit of chess that you're in a better position to be able to complete your task. And that is what happened. If he didn't ask me, I would have not written the book. We'll sometimes have a direct link with the president if needed, or a senior government official that's connected to that. They will make the decisions. Whatever they decide is final. Sometimes the go ahead for the RCT release has to come from the president himself if he's involved. So then all the facts are set out on the table. This is the situation. We can save that, especially if it's in a prison situation like St. Albans 2. There's a woman inside. There's more than 50 prisoners. They don't have any woman in there. If they're going to start raping her, she will die. You understand? So facts like that they'll put on the table. The Jock will put it on the table, command center, and then the senior government official, if it is the hostage release of a high statute, he would give the command, and then it will flow down the line where the senior officer will already be in position. We'll have our plan, we'll be in position, or we'll set the wheels in motion that we can do the hostage release. Sometimes the hostage release would be rushed, which is not a good idea. And then you have to tactically retreat with your tails between your leg, like me and Rommel retreated with our tails between our leg out of the prison. But then you go make another good plan. And you said Warden Willard with the new dog Herman's in. And then that's a fighting team. And you do the same with your hostage release, especially if it's something like a prison. It's made to keep people out. And then you have a super plan that cannot fail. And after you finish with your selection course and you get to the office there, and after your wing parade, because your wings, your physical wings get hit into your chest by the commander is hit into your chest, and then some more of the operators comes and they also hit it into your chest. So it's quite blue here and bleedy afterwards. And you think, well, why are they doing this? But actually there's a purpose for it. Then they make you swim through some sort of a Surichi muddy channel, what I can remember. They make you drink a lot, Then they give you, I'm going to call it a cup. I don't want to go into detail there. They give you some sort of a cup to drink out while you're lying in those muddy waters. And then you have to, it's some sort of a mixture of alcoholic beverage, which tastes horrible. And you have to drink that, when you come out of there, now you can care with the money, now you can, with the operators, you can, and that's feeling is absolutely magic, it's if you're floating on air. And then, I want to talk to some of the operators now and then. Now I have to down my drink. Later on, it's time to go to sleep. That's it. You also see on the book, it would say, it says here, one of the world's foremost elite special forces units. And I also write in here, I say it was once or ever secretive unit. So there was one guy that did a podcast. He had a copy of my book. He said, he showed some of the videos that we made, that Jeff Chargan made of, I think he came from BBC. And he said they're not, of course, on the back cover, I say it's once or ever secretive unit. And the reason for it is because we're very close, not allowed any photos or videos at the beginning. Now it has changed after the old commander, Mike Fryer, God rest his soul, he's passed away. Brought in Jeff Chargan, and they basically exposed our unit to the international community. Was through those videos, they're all available, most of them on YouTube. So this guy that did a postcard, and he basically showed some of our videos, and then he said they're not so secretive because you can see the guy's face. Remember, I say once ever so secretive, it's the past, it's not the present. So, just to correct that guy. Just to correct that guy in a podcast, Yeah, that's it. I think I'm off my story, or I completed it. The normal police were very cooperative, always. What we told them to do and ask to support us, they did. Even though Lukavana, when we did hostage release in the prison service, which we did a few, they were extremely cooperative. I mean, St. Albans too, when we completed that hostage release successfully, they opened up the canteen. Very the mistake they made, because that was our psychologist in the old days. So then we celebrated like we used to do, and then we'll just have fun like boys do. They made a mistake after that. No, it was not that job. We did some job in KwaZulu-Natal, and it was extremely urgent. They flew us in with choppers, like Kings. They flew us in, and they dropped us on the DZ, and we did our job. And then they decided, no, they're going to use the cheaper option. They're going to drive us a police bus back to Pretoria. Not the task force, only that. I'd rather fly them, We had this horse and trailer, and then we had this bus at the beginning, and then we had these rows of seats, and the more prim and proper officers and senior guys sat in the front, way in the front, and then we operators, honor officer, we sat in the back, and we formed two groups, and we tried to steal one of the operators from the other group. So then we had to protect each other, but we were already, well seasoned, and the boss was battling to keep the boss on the road because of all the commotion. And then when you manage to steal one of those operators, we would all bite his backside, and then all these blue marks. So you didn't want to be stolen by the other group. So we fought. We fought to keep your group safe, and I think we lost 2 winners. So they stopped that exercise. They always flew us in. We had to go. Negotiator will try and negotiate, explain to the guy it's best to give himself up. Lots of the criminals, if they hear the special task force is there, they hand over their weapons immediately. Because they know the outcome. And then like previously mentioned, once if negotiations fail, and usually as well, if a shot has been fired, a lot of the time on the inside by the hostage taker, that's an extremely aggressive sign. He might have taken somebody's life if there's more than one hostage, and it's usually best to act quickly after that. Now, regarding the book, if they want a personalized signed copy of my book, so what I do a lot of the time, I always have some copies with me. They need to contact me directly. Then I can write in a message, maybe the task force lees it, you have never lived until you have almost died, and for those who fight for it, life is a flavor. The protected will never know. I can write that in front of the book. It is a personal signed copy, and then I can mail it. Unfortunately, the mailing expense to mail it overseas is sometimes up to 3 times the value of the book, but that depends up to you. I also have a limited number. I probably have 3 or 4 books available that I only have because I bought out the last 10 that were available. It comes with a matching coin. It's valid now at 7,500 for the book and 825 obviously for the coin. That's numbered. The book and the coins got the same number. Hardcover color edition with a dust cover that's over it. It's here. It's not gathering dust, but it's in my cupboard to only serious collectors. I will not release it to anybody else. All right, what do I do now, Chris? I've got my own security company, number one. So because of my extensive experience in Africa, the Middle East, also of my health and safety background that I've acquired, I've now applied my experience and my knowledge back to South Africa and Africa. One of the things I do mine specialist security, gold mines, diamond mines. I know how to do investigations. It's easy for me to suss out where the problems lie in a mine, to do the investigations, to give to the client the recommendations, what they need to do to be able to suss out the criminal element, I would say, as such. And then when they do the recommendations, their production would increase. I'm also sometimes contracted out to oil and gas companies, where I consult for them. One client, I basically demobilized the project where I wanted it demobilized 31st of March. And only later when I returned to the office, I learned that the director said, I will not be able to accomplish the task. I accomplished the task 3 days earlier than they gave me the deadline. That is just before COVID hit. When that was in the swamps, 3 hours, it probably took us 5, 6 because of the huge convoy to get to land. I had many, many challenges to face. That would actually be a very good book, something to put in a good one. I have many challenges I had to face as a singular expatriate, I wanted to say, but I successfully completed that mission. If I didn't do it that day, COVID would have hit us and we would have been stuck at least minimum for another 60 days. You can multi that by 500,000 US dollars that it cost them to be on the project every day. That is what I saved my client. Okay, and then needless to say, I sat another 4.5 months. I sat in a base there because of the COVID. Luckily, I had the swimming pool, I had the gym, so I could train and I had Wi-Fi. So, and then when I landed in Johannesburg, they put me in all of us in a bus, and they put us in a hotel again for another 7 days. But it was comfortable. And yes, I also do, high-profile security contracts. I don't really do guarding. If it's guarding, I would subcontract that, or give it to my joint venture company partner, which I will not exclude. I will exclude their name. I also have hobbies, like I do embroidery on t-shirts like this one that I wear here. I've also have intellectual property that not everybody is happy about the name, but if I injure their ego, it's their problem, not mine, which I call Real Operator. So Real Operator, the name, and there's a reason, you know. I don't know if you're gonna get time for that, but it would actually be something interesting. So I design like, you know, like caps. That is now my Real Operator logo. So I would put this on t-shirts and caps. It's like a hobby. I put it now on a pen. So I'm making the Real Operator pen. So I'm digitizing that. I'm putting on zipper lighters. I've got whiskey holders. It is absolutely a hobby. I mean, you can see the quality of this cap. That's my selection course. Okay, now I first want to show on the side. That's an operator's badge. If you look closely, you can see the red eye. According to the heraldry, I did it specifically, and then that is my captain rank, the 3 stars, and then you'll see it reads there. I started Taki Legacy. So we'll see what we'll do with the company, you know. If I have the right partners, investors, whatever, we will do something with it. But that now belongs to me or us, whoever would invest in that with the ideas. So I do that as a hobby. And then later on, I'll start selling this project because I think it looks quite cool, you know. And you know, we as talkies, we always, when we greet each other, when we say goodbye, you know, there's a saying that we always say. We say, "Moet dat die aanhouer jou rol nie," which means, directly translated in English, means do not let the hostage take a play, rumble tumble with you. So it's like a motivational to you, you know. You always have to win. When it's a fight, when it is a challenge, you have to never give up. Do not let that hostage taker roll you, you know. Do not let him win you. You have to win him to save your hostages, of course. Some of the projects that I'm busy with, I cannot disclose. Due to the security industry can be an extremely, I don't want to use the term dog-eat world, but it is kind of very true. Some of the projects that I'm working on 2 years plus, it will come to fruition. But there would be investors that need to come in because the money needed to fuel it to be able to reach a goal is not, it's not little money. But we build our presentation for our clients, for our investors. We build it so we give them a professional project, you know. And yeah, we're looking at different things. We're businessmen as well, fortune of souls and businessmen. I only work with people I trust. People I don't trust, I keep them very far away from me. You know, I'm still, like I said, old school. If I shake your hand and I tell you I will do it, like I told Carl, I'll write the book. Did I do it? I did it, you know. If I tell you I do it, I will complete the task. I will complete the task at hand. So even if it takes a little bit longer, but I will definitely complete the mission. I think what I can just elaborate about, because it's an international podcast, that I also do charters anywhere in Africa, anywhere in the world. So I've got charter companies. I can transfer valuable cargo, all legally, lawfully, people from anywhere in the continent, without security. That's one of the things that I've also been working on for a long time. We basically covered quite a bit. There's actually so much to talk about. You will not, like you're right, you will not cover it on one podcast. It's not possible. But just remember what we spoke about in the first one. If we speak again. And then Maris as well, he's got many stories too. Maybe later on you can get me and him together and another guy, and they all can give their stories. Late in the evening, just like Sofrep, because when I did my podcast with Sofrep, it was the first one. They very relaxed. By me, it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock. I obviously had to, and I was stuck in that base with the COVID thing, that operation I told you about, admission. And then I went into the office, and they were having a scotch and everything, and it's very relaxed and casual. They closed the bar at us because people fought there. So I just drank what I had, coffee and so on. So it was very relaxed. If you can bring in a group, Maritz is there, you will see the guys with, but there's two types of groups I almost want to say about a task force. And I wanna label it as such: the people that believes in a peregrine falcon that's on the left chest, and the people that believes it's on the right chest. I just want to group it like that. It's because of the talkies, they've got strong personalities, like sometimes will clash. People like that need a strong leader to manage them.